There has been a lot, a lot of news about the Queen. Well, obviously, since she died, and has pretty much dominated the news every day since she died. It's obvious it was going to happen, but even I'm like, I'm not pro monarchy. I'm not very anti-rabid, anti-monarchy. As I've said before, I just don't really care. There's far other things going on in this country that we sort of maybe should be paying attention to. And one you may have not heard recently either. You might have heard talk that Liz Truss recently sacked a guy in the Treasury by a guy named Tom Scholar. You may have never heard of this guy before. That's fine. He's a civil servant. There is no one out there, I guarantee, who would at least be able to name like top civil servants. I think even people who worked in like the civil service might be able to at least name a few, but there's no way they would be able to name them all. I think it would be impossible. This isn't the case where you've got people out there who can pretty much name every single member of parliament, and there are those types of people out there. Trust me on that. I'm not one of them, but good on those people who can memorize every single member of the UK Parliament. But this is going to have, I think, a big impact. And I think it sets a very, very clear tone about the direction and the willingness that Liz Truss and her team want to go in. And that is, I think, very, very clearly wants to be seen doing things, challenging the orthodoxy, as we heard from people who have still been covering sort of the news and sort of the news around this. But this could be a very bad move. And I think it does, as we've talked about before. I think the civil service should remain very, very much unpoliticized. I think this sets a very bad precedent. And I think this could maybe signal a undermining of the civil service that could damage it for a long time to come. So with that said, let's get into this then. So before we do that, though, please do remember to hit that like, share, and subscribe button. And of course, down below, there are links to my Patreon page and a one-off donation link called Buy Me Coffee, where you can buy me a coffee. And as always, thank you very much to all those people who do help and support the channel that way. So, of course, let's crack on with this then, shall we? So, this comes from the UK in a Changing Europe, the title of The Sacking of Tom Scholar, a move that undermines the Treasury, the civil service, and the government. So, 3 significant civil service changes were made in the immediate wake of Liz Truss's ascent to the premiership. First, she reorganised Number 10. She sacked most of Boris Johnson's political advisors, as has become pretty routine, even when there is no change in the governing party. She slimmed down the operation, a bit of a habit from incoming PMs, which they then reverse, moving a lot of civil servants on the Tuesday morning who could say they worked in Number 10 to the other side of the green brazier door into the cabinet office. Many were reported very upset what they saw as a status downgrade. She also changed the principal private secretary, or the PPS, and the key official in her private secretary, bringing in Nick Carras, who had done a job for her in the Foreign Office, and Johnson did the same when he brought in the now notorious Martin Reynolds, also his PPS, as the Foreign Secretary, and who had organised at least one of the infamous Downing Street parties. That has pluses. The new PPS has already very well established relationship with the Prime Minister and has minused in terms of trying to sort of get up to speed. But in fact, that the Castras has worked in Number 10 before should make that at least easier. Second, she's moved out the National Security Advisor, Sir Stephen Lovegrove, into what looks like to be an invented role for the Defence Industrial Advisor the next few months, and moved Sir Tim Barrow from the FCMO, and Sir Tim is arguably much better qualified for the NSA role than Sir Stephen. He has also headed the, quote, political side of the SDCO, which is code for the security and threats side of their work. He's a former ambassador to Russia and Ukraine and was head of the UK representation in Brussels during the Brexit negotiations. He will have got to know Liz well in his time in the Foreign Office. The post was first created by David Cameron back in 2010 and was originally intended to be held by a minister, but Cameron decided to appoint an official. There have been very much moved inspired by a change in the PM before, but never at this speed. Theresa May did dispense with the services of Sir Mark Lyne-Gant, who then was accused of mansplaining to the displeasure of the PM, and then replaced him with a former Home Office Permanent Secretary and career autocrat Sir Mark Sidwell. Boris Johnson then dispensed with Sidwell as the Cabinet Secretary and NSA before renaming Lord Frost as NSA, then substituting for him for Lovegrove days before he was due to start. Truss is making clear she wants people that she trusts around her. But one of the biggest departures from the practice of constitutional norms comes with the summary dismissal of the long-serving Treasury Permanent Secretary, Sir Tom Scholar. The Treasury Permanent Secretaries have had a rough time with the administrations and changes before. Back in 1979, when the then Permanent Secretary Sir Doug Wallace was given a very uncomfortable advice to the new Chancellor Sir Godfrey Ho about his proposed budget. Although he remained in post for another couple of years, he was marginalised and Howe established a closer relationship with other senior servants. One, Sir Peter Middleton, predicted that he went on to replace Wass, while meanwhile the key ideological appointment was the new chief economic advisor, with more sympathetic to the government's monetary approach. That led to the appointment of Terry Burns in his early 30s, which was seen as extremely young in the civil service, which was still very age-bound at that time. Burns then eventually became permanent secretary, but he had his own falling outs with a new chancellor, in this case Gordon Brown. He and Brown had a very scratchy relationship from the start of the direction and to take of the supervision of the financial institutions away from the Bank of England when it was given its independence to set new interest rates. Burns hung on for a year and then left, and then was replaced by another Treasury lifer, Sir Andrew Turnbull. Meanwhile, Ed Balls, Brown's policy brain, made the transition from the Special Economic Chief Advisor. But on Tuesday night, the incoming Chancellor sacked his permanent secretary as his first act. This may have been partly personal. It could have been that Scholar crossed Liz Truss when she was the chief secretary. No treasurer to the permanent secretary has ever had much time for the number two at the minister at the Treasury. And she was determined, she may have been determined on payback. Or it could have been a very much opening shot in the, quote, war on the Treasury orthodoxy that the new government sees as a barrier to the UK's brighter economic future. But the Treasury knows its role is to give what it regards as the best advice, but then to implement the decisions ministers then make. And ministers have very often overruled the Treasury's advice, and it is their absolute prerogative, as did Ho did in 1979. But Kwarteng has defied against even giving Scholar a brief chance to see if they could get on. The decision has been attacked by a number of previous Conservative Treasury ministers. Inevitably, this is overshadowed by the death of the Queen, and Curzon and Truss's decision looks like an attack on the impartiality of the civil service, adding a new ideological complexity to tests to appointments. They have probably already alienated many staff in the Treasury who looked up to Scholar. They have lost an official with an unrivaled track record, in managing the economic fallouts of crises in the middle of a major economic crisis. Externally, they are already risking their credibility with markets at a time when the pound is already feeble and already spooked by their attack on the independent institutions such as the OBR and the Bank of England, and they have made life much tougher for any potential successor who risks being seen as a yes person. All in all, it adds up to a very difficult start for His Majesty's Treasury and an immediate challenge to the constitutional norms around the civil service from the new government. Kwarteng may think he has stabbed his authority on the Treasury, but he may soon find that he has made his already hard task even harder. And that is what is essentially going on at the moment. It seems to be a lot of politicking, a lot of playing about. That's essentially what it is. And if you're sacking such a well-known person, such an influential figure, and as was said in that article, you've got a guy who already has experience in dealing with economic crises or crises, you know, pick your poison. But, why would you get rid of such a guy at such a time like this? I think everyone can agree that we are in a crisis, and there are many crises to come. And you've got rid of a guy who has experience in dealing with this type of stuff. It doesn't make a lot of sense, but I think in the coming days and weeks, we will see this as what is being dubbed challenging the orthodoxy. Um, but we'll see. We'll see what this, eventually comes. But as it was laid out, look, the Treasury's first responsibility is for them to tell ministers, okay, this is our recommendations. This is what we think you should do. Oh, and if you want to do this is what the consequences are going to be, which is what a ministry should do. But they are now setting a very, very bad example that if you advise a minister, even if you give them what is the right advice or what you feel is the right advice, but it's not what they want to hear, then you are basically saying you are permanently damaging your career prospects and even damaging your future job because you might get sacked. So as a result, what's going to happen in the Treasury? You're going to get people who are going to be, oh no, there's this potential disaster. I better warn, I better warn Kwasi about this. But then all of a sudden, before they reach the door, go, maybe I better not because I might lose my job if I do that. And that you can already see is a recipe for colossal disaster. So as always, thank you very much for watching. And as always, there are links to down below, like I say, my Patreon page and the one-off donation link called Buy Me a Coffee, where you can buy me a coffee. And of course, there is the one-off donation link for YouTube as well, called the YouTube thank you button, which is also down below. And there is the YouTube subscription called the Pony Club, where you can join that. You get bells, whistles, and whatnot. And you get we do a weekly video for all the subscribers on Patreon and on that as well. So watch out for that. So as always, thank you very much for watching. And of course, we'll see you all next time.